Good morning, everyone. My name is Khwezi Kunene, and I'm going to be presenting on the impact of pandemic control on the early childhood development model. My presentation today will consist of the following: an introduction where I define early childhood education and introduce the early childhood development model, a literature review where I discuss the impact of the lockdown on the ECD system, as well as the individual elements of that ECD system, and a problem description which will include defining the types of inequality which affect the ECD system, and finally a methodology where I'll share my findings, policy recommendations, and my preliminary results. Early childhood development refers to the physical, emotional, psychological, and cognitive development of children aged 2 to 6 years old. The South African government defines early education as a comprehensive approach to programs and policies for children from birth to 9 years of age with the active participation of their parents and caregivers. Its purpose is to protect the rights of children so that they are able to fully develop their social, emotional, and physical potential. This is done to ensure that all children enter the schooling system as a potentially rounded individual so that they may have academic success. The early development of children's intellectual, social, and physical abilities has the potential to affect their long-term achievement beyond the initial introduction to the classroom as well as into their adult lives. The early childhood development model is a model which aims to improve the quality of ECD education that children receive so that we can reduce the inequalities that shapes the realities of the ECD system. The existing ECDM created by Venter brings together 9 variables and calls a relationship with each other. The 9 variables are namely poverty, health, stunting, family support, aptitude, late academic success, ECD quality, practitioner quality, and infrastructure. Venter analyzed the ECD system effectiveness in the school readiness measure in children. The causal loop diagram behind me shows how these variables interact with each other, both directly and indirectly. I will use the 2 variables, namely poverty and later academic success, to show how they relate to each other. An increase in later academic success has a direct impact on poverty, as increased later academic success means an increase in household income, which is a decrease in poverty. And the indirect relationship between poverty and later academic success is as follows. An increase in poverty decreases family support, which increases stunting in children, and an increase in stunting results in a decrease in aptitude, and a decrease in aptitude results in a decrease in later academic success. There are multiple factors that affect children's performance and inevitably their school readiness. Factors like hunger, health, and safety, which fall under children's constitutional rights, greatly impact a child's performance and participation in ECD centres. School readiness is shown to be greatly affected by ECD quality and attendance. Since attendance is strongly correlated with accessibility, it is reasonable to assume that children who have easier access to ECD have a much higher measure of school readiness. However, when the pandemic struck, the physical attendance was no longer feasible. In March 2020, the South African government initiated lockdowns in response to the COVID-19 outbreaks, and as a result, many children were unable to attend their ECD centres. The pandemic controls, like the lockdown, had devastating effects on the already fragile ECD system, since many children were unable to attend, and this halted the critical development of children at a critical age. As children from wealthier socioeconomic backgrounds were introduced to remote learning and compromised ECD, children from poorer socioeconomic backgrounds had no formal ECD education whatsoever. On the 6th of June, the High Court allowed ECD centres to reopen and ECD services to resume in accordance with the COVID-19 regulations. This means that social distancing and rotation schedules were implemented. As a result, the ECD practitioners had limited interactions with the children as well as less time as they did before, and this greatly compromises the quality of the ECD education that the children were receiving before. ECD goes beyond the initial introduction to the classroom, and it is imperative that the government have interventions in place to ensure that all children are given a fair and equal chance to succeed. Many ECD centres, both formal and informal, provide food and nutritious snacks, and by food and nutritious snacks to ensure that children's constitutional rights to basic nutrition is not violated. As inadequate nutrition greatly affects a child's ability to concentrate and perform complex tasks, thus affecting their school readiness measure. Due to the lockdown, children have been denied access to these nutritious meals, and the lockdown made staggering changes to the lives of millions of children, as children whose only access to these meals was through the ECD centres. And to alleviate the sudden circumstances onset by the lockdown, the government implemented a few relief schemes, such as the temporary employer-employee relief scheme, in addition to the child support grant. And another intergovernment intervention is to create ECD service guidelines in accordance to the COVID-19 regulations to ensure that all children enter the school system with a similar measure of school readiness. And the final intervention is a home visit where a social worker is called to evaluate the quality of the child's home to determine whether or not it is safe for the child to learn and grow. The lockdown affected the ECD system as a whole, specifically attendance and quality. As mentioned before, the lockdown compromised the quality of the ECD education for children, and children with access to online resources were introduced to the remote model of ECD education. And even though the High Court allowed ECD services to resume, many parents were hesitant about sending their children back to school. The lockdown restricted the movement of many citizens, and the main interactions children had were with their parents and their caregivers, making their parents and caregivers unofficial ECD practitioners. However, not all parents were able to tend to their children's needs, which further compromised their cognitive development and negatively affected their school readiness. South Africa has two types of inequalities which are prevalent in the ECD system, namely intra-provincial inequality and inter-provincial inequality. Intra-provincial inequality in this context is defined to be the inequality present because of the different levels of ECD education due to the difference in socioeconomic quintiles within a province. Research has shown a strong correlation between ECD quality and household income, whereas interprovincial is the distance in the ECD system's strengths between the provinces. And prior to this, the lockdown exacerbated these inequalities and shaped the realities of the ECD system today. However, the ECD system have been adapted in accordance with the COVID-19 regulations, and that has negatively impacted must be added to the existing ECDM, and which policies must be implemented to the ECD services and programs should there be another pandemic. System dynamics is an approach which uses simulation-based modeling based on feedback systems, which complements system. System dynamics is the appropriate modeling technique as it can accurately capture the dynamic nature of the ECD systems. Venter found that the ECD outcomes were impacted by four main variables, namely family support, a safe community, a safe environment, and trained ECD practitioners. For this research, the following data sets were used. The General Household Survey and the Early Learning Outcomes measures were used to populate the simulation for the ECD system where there was no lockdown. The General Household Survey and the NIDS CRAM simulated the ECD system for reality where there was lockdown. The datasets chosen allowed for an intra-provincial analysis for KZN as well as an inter-provincial analysis for KZN and the Western Cape. ECDM is adapted analyzing the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic on the ECD system, and I will refer to this model as the ECDM-CIA. The exogenous variable lockdown was included to represent the real-life counterpart of the pandemic control. Child hunger is used in place of stunting for this model, as hunger is a prevalent issue in South Africa. Infrastructure was changed to ECD quality as the ECDM-CIA requires ECD quality to relate it to school readiness. And the ECDM-CIA will output school readiness as the variable. Each variable listed here has an assigned goodness score. A goodness score is a value between 0 and 1. where 0 is aligned with the least desirable outcome and 1 is aligned with the most desirable outcome. For example, if ECD quality had a score of 0.7, we can assume that the quality is good. Whereas if the poverty had a goodness score of 0.3, we can assume that the household income is relatively low. Using this method of goodness scores, we find that it's easier to quantify all of the variables and compute initial values for the simulation. Here we have initial values for the variables which were directly affected by the lockdown as per the causal loop diagram, and in addition to the child health variable, which was used thanks to the loop crime dataset. Prior to the lockdown, KZN had a poverty score of 0.37 for quintiles 1 to 3 and 0.84 for quintiles 4 to 5. But when the lockdown was initiated, the poverty score decreased by 24% for quintile 1 to 3, whereas for the richer quintiles, quintile 4 to 5, it only decreased by 8%. Long-term effects of the lockdown are yet to be seen. However, if we simulate for 2020 to 2030, we can analyze the impact of the lockdown on the ECD system and compare it to that of the simulation for the undisturbed system. The impact of the lockdown is immediately evident in these. The true effects remain to be seen, as there's currently insufficient data to fully appreciate the impact of the lockdown on these variables, as well as the system as a whole. The simulation produced values for the ECDM for 2020 to 2030. Quintiles 1 to 3 show that the ECD system reaches an equilibrium at 0.6, which means that this undisturbed system has an ECD system strength of 60%. Quintiles 4 and 5 show that the ECD system is the system strength of 72%. Quintiles 1 to 3, the school readiness measure is 0.55, which means that the system produces 5-year-old children who have a school readiness measure of 55%. Whereas for quintiles 4 and 5, school readiness in 5-year-olds is 78%, significantly higher and expected since this is the richer quintile. However, post-lockdown, the simulation results are as follows. For quintiles 1 to 3, the system reaches equilibrium at a lower value of 48%. As for quintiles 4 and 5, the ECD system reaches equilibrium at approximately 70%, which is a smaller change compared to the quintile 1 to 3. Quintile 1 to 3 school readiness in 5-year-olds decreased from 55% to 49%, and for quintiles 4 to 5, the school readiness decreased from 70% to 65%. The impact of the lockdown is shown as all of the systems reached equilibrium at lower values. Western Cape is a slightly wealthier province, and the lockdown data showed that it had minimal effects on the ECD system as a whole. So for the Western Cape, quintiles 1 to 3 of the undisturbed system shows that the system reached equilibrium for 55%. For quintiles 4 to 5, the ECD system reached equilibrium 70%. School readiness in 5-year-old children is at 60%, which is higher than for KZN quintiles 1 to 3. School readiness for quintiles 4 and 5 is at 80%, which is higher than that of KZN, which was at 70%. And post-lockdown, the effects on the Western Cape were minimal, thus the simulation results were virtually identical, as the system still reaches equilibrium at 55% and 70% for quintile and 70% for quintiles 3. The school readiness in 5-year-olds still reaches equilibrium at 60% post-lockdown and 80% for quintiles 4 and 5. Okay. The school readiness for the different provinces are as follows: 60% for the Western Cape, for quintiles 1 to 3, and 80% for the Western Cape, quintiles 4 and 5. Whereas for KwaZulu-Natal, it's 55%, 70% for quintiles 1 to 3, and 4 and 5 respectively. This shows that even though there is inter-provincial inequality between the provinces, whereas with the Western Cape and KwaZulu-Natal have clear differences because the Western Cape has a stronger ECD system, but inequality does exist between the quintiles, whereas for KwaZulu-Natal, intra-provincial inequality does exist as well, but the ECD system is relatively weaker compared to that of the Western Cape. Post-lockdown, we see that the Western Cape's school readiness values did not change, whereas KwaZulu-Natal reported a 5% decrease in both their school readiness for the quintiles 1 to 3 and 4 to 5. So what interventions can we make to improve the ECD system of the quintiles 1 to 3 for KZN and make it similar to that of the quintile 4 to 5 for KZN prior to the lockdown? If we eliminate poverty, i.e. the government increases stipends for the grants or introduces more grants, that does not have much of an effect as it only raises the school readiness by 6%. Whereas if we initiate feeding schemes to alleviate hunger, that only increases school readiness by 2%, whereas for compulsory attendance and improved health by making clinical visits compulsory only improves the school readiness by 40%. And a combination of all the interventions, which is an extreme test, improves the school readiness significantly as it raises it to 68%, and that is closer to our goal of 70% for quintiles 4 and 5 prior to the lockdown. The lockdown exacerbated the inequalities both within a province and throughout the country. So for both intra-provincial inequality and inter-provincial inequality. We are in need of multiple interventions as the combination of interventions is going to make a significant difference in the school readiness measure that is produced by our ECD systems. And these interventions need to be made constantly to ensure that the system does not underperform nor collapse. And we expect to see an increased effect of the lockdown as more data is released, as these are still preliminary results and it's still very early to fully appreciate the impact of the lockdown, especially for provinces similar to that of the Western Cape, where this ECD system was able to fully absorb the shock. So much.
Arthur, thank you for keeping so carefully. I'm honest. What me was because I was trying to make out when I had to push. I'll show you we have got time for some questions. I suppose I should ask the floor for.
Thank you. I've really enjoyed that. So it seemed like you were showing for KZN, with all interventions, you would go from a 50% school readiness measure to 68%. So that's not 100%. So what other interventions are possible to get it even higher?
Well, I specifically focused on the interventions that were determined by the variables that the lockdown directly affected according to the causal loop diagram. But what we can do to improve the school readiness measure is implement more home visits and improve the safety in the communities, because all of those variables, they do have an impact on the school readiness, which is an output.
Would you run those with the same system dynamics model? And just adding maybe extra nodes.
I think so. The initial values are changed, but yes, it would at least still be a model.
But I can't see people behind me very well. Are you ready? Oh.
You say the combination of the interventions is greater than the sum of the individual interventions?
I think you're going to see a much larger impact with a combination of the interventions because, as I showed, a single intervention doesn't really improve the school readiness. It doesn't even get us back to prior to pre-COVID conditions at all. And that's what we need to do so that we can actually address the gap that was exacerbated by the lockdown.
And have you been working with educational experts on the Sure.
I really enjoyed your talk. It was really interesting. Do you think, and this is probably a little bit of a controversial one, that your research could be used to perhaps persuade to hold back their kids a year or so until they were ready for school, instead of just using social interventions? Because it's difficult in this country to roll out social interventions more than we have. And that would, and your model will show then properly how they develop a year later, and how that would affect their academics and otherwise. So I think it's really cool research to maybe propose. I mean, it's controversial. Parents are probably not going to want it. It's pretty cool.
Better just like hold them back so that they have a sufficient level of school readiness before they enter school ready.
Yeah.
Otherwise, it just sets them up.
Yeah. You probably have to get some psychological behavioral back you on that. But I think it's a really cool suggestion just for the academic development purely.
Yes, I think that's what I was really implying with my. You're working with those who have to implement it. Mm-hmm. And that's what OR should be about in the long run. We can have one fast.
Why is there such a big difference between KwaZulu-Natal and?
Well, we chose KwaZulu-Natal because prior to the lockdown, their ECD system strength was lower to that of the Western Cape, which is where I initially started my study. But I also was motivated to choose KwaZulu-Natal because there was so much social unrest, especially during the lockdown. And I just thought it'd be really interesting to look at how it affected the children specifically and their education.
Right, well, thank you very much. We'll leave some time for those who want to swap sessions, but I'm sure you could also speak. Speak here, please. Let's speak about these.
They teach it not being that's a free online course.
She was one mentions to the It's the same area. It's involved with the sort of international. Like me about setting up.
Yeah, so ESCOM
In South Africa, but never really.
ESCOM and the link and ESCOM's been running.
Yeah, but ESCOM people dynamics are really hard and you.
Yes, until Zanini.
You know, I feel like I should think up one. Yeah. I've got a conference. Have you seen this one?
I tried to design something. It's models, but they wouldn't accept it.
Yeah. No, Nalini.
It's from above. I can't remember when that was. 15 years ago. Yeah. Okay. Well, that's a clock.
Yeah.
Oh, we should begin on the second. Also, systems thinking and educational. I see. Our speaker, Lieschen, has been running also for the last 10 years, and usually what she says goes, but now I'm chairman. But over to you, Lieschen, you can introduce your topic.
Thanks. For those who don't know me, I'm a lecturer at the Department of Logistics at Stellenbosch University, and I'm going to use this opportunity to introduce you to my research group and to give you an overview of all of the research projects that my students have been doing since 2018 mainly. So to give my research group some context, South Africa is a country that is characterized by extreme socioeconomic inequality. We have probably currently the highest Gini index coefficient in the world, maybe only competing with Brazil each year for that position. What that means is that the poorest person in this country is trying to make do with 350 Rand per month, while the richest person in this country is making do with 250 million. So it is, the inequality is very broad. But also, if you think that that is shocking, you are in the same quintile as that richest person if you earn over 20,000 Rand per month. That puts you in the top quintile in this country. So that is the breadth of the inequality that we have. Now, since the abolishment of apartheid and the 1953 Bantu Education Act, so many initiatives have been looking at alleviating the socioeconomic inequality through education. It hasn't been very successful, so look at the stats so far. When we look at every 100 grade 1 children that enroll, so that's the first time that they enroll into formal learning, only about 60 of them will actually sit for the National Senior Certificate exam. So that is the matriculation exam. Of those 60 that actually sit, only 37 will pass. So when government is reporting on how well our matriculants are passing, it's because they're only taking the 37 as a fraction of 60 and not of the 40 that we've already lost. Then of the 37, only about 12 of them will have the exemption that they need to be able to apply to study for an undergraduate degree at a university. Of those 12, only about 9 will start immediately, and only 3 will start later after they were able to work to get some money to fund their studies. Of that 12, then only 6 of them will pass within 6 years, that single undergraduate degree. So that's your basic BSc, your basic BCom, and only 4 of those will pass within the minimum time. So if you look at the lowest bar and you look at the highest bar, for every 100 grade 1s that we enroll, we will get 4 undergraduate degrees. That's not a master's, that's not an honors. And you know, if you're looking at employment requirements, very few people are looking for just a basic bachelor's anymore. And yet we can barely get 4 basic bachelor's out of every 100 grade 1s. So South Africa doesn't have an unemployment problem. We have an unemployability problem. Our children aren't employable. So how do we know that that is true? Well, if we look at statistics that we get from our school effectiveness study, we look at our TIMS, which measures our mathematics proficiency, we look at our PILS, which measures our literacy, then what we see is this is dire indeed, but it's not the same for all of the socioeconomic quintiles in the country. In fact, if we then look at these tests from the grade 3s, grade 4s, grade 5s, and then we have the 9s where we have the mathematical scores, then we see that the richest quintile, quintile 5, is actually on standard. If somebody says that they are enrolled for grade 9 mathematics, they're actually performing on grade 9 mathematics level. But that drastically declines as we look at socioeconomic quintile declines. So socioeconomic quintile is what your parents are earning. Like I said, if you are earning over 20,000 a month, then you are in the top quintile. So the projections on that, on how school ready then the matriculants will be, you can see are two very different tangents. With the richer quintile will perform adequately and find a graduation and find employment adequately. But the poorer quintiles are almost lost. You saw the matriculation rates, so that even if we can just employ basic matriculants, which we barely do in this country, then there are very few of them. Okay, so this is the most shocking statistic, I suppose, is when we do look at our PILS test, then we see that 78% of our grade 4s cannot read for meaning in any language. So what that means is that they can sound out words. So it's not like they can't recognize words, but they are reading so slowly that their short-term memory forgets what they have read by the time that they reach the end of a sentence. So if the sentence is the starfish swims, they read so slowly that at the end, if you ask them what the sentence was, they'll think it's something of cosmic or it had something with a galaxy because there was some star in there, but they had no context of it. 80% of our children cannot read. So in response to this, we started the research group, which we use systems thinking to analyze this problem. This problem is highly complex. It has so many variables, and we try to start just looking at which interventions we can reasonably access, working with government, working with the limitations to see how we can solve the inequality problem in South Africa's basic education system. So where did this start? My introduction to system dynamics was when I was still employed at SASOL. And some of you will know Martie Harmse. She is a fellow of the society. And Martie Harmse introduced me to system dynamics. And we were tasked by SASOL to solve the problem of lack of diversity in their promotions and eventually in their top management. And we looked to see if we could use system dynamics to try and understand the systemic reasons why diversity juniors were getting blocked on promotions and getting blocked, or why we were having such high attrition on our diversity juniors, because that's what we also saw is we couldn't hold on to them. At the same time, they were also very worried about the health of their bursary stream. Now, SASOL is famous for the large bursaries that they give to undergraduate students, and then those graduate students are contractually bound to go work for SASOL. But they were seeing a decline in the quality of the engineers that they could actually get. So they tasked us with building a bursar diversity model to also see how we can increase the number of the bursars, the quality of the bursars, but also the diversity of the bursars. Now, for this work, we were nominated for the I4's Prize in Development in 2014, I think it was. We were very excited to go, and then SASOL's IP got cold feet and they made us withdraw because they were being threatened by the unions because of the findings of the model. So I can't even show you the findings because it's triggering. Right, but something good that came out of that, it was a big disappointment, but then the SASOL and Zalo Foundation picked up our research. And they wanted to take it further, but move it away from the bursary pool with the university students. And let's start with the babies. Let's start with the ECD, with the grade 1s, and see what the biggest systemic solution here is. So here we started workshopping with 200 practitioners and program coordinators, and everybody had a plan. Everybody said, no, it was the teachers. We have to fix the teachers. No, we have to fix the resources. Just send textbooks. It's feeding. The answer is feeding. No, it's poverty. We need to fix it. Everybody had a plan. What we had to do is figure out how all of these plans were going to come together. So we hosted all of these workshops. Professor Musango, you'll recognize Dr. Buerta sitting there. He's the president of the System Dynamics Society. And I was so inspired by your talk this morning because I remember this, trying to get them to just speak to each other and to understand. So what we found the most effective way was game playing. So let me just take you there. In the end, we distilled from that massive spaghetti diagram. We were able to distill just these 9 variables, and we would let the subject matter experts play each of these roles. And the conflict then helped us to understand what were the causal links, who was waiting for whom to make which decision before they could make their decision, where were the holdups in the model. So we were able to distill that massive spaghetti diagram. And then we also looked at the more formal literature. So Alan Gaynor is probably the leader of system dynamic simulation for education applications. And he started with this work in the 1980s already. So we had our formal literature that we could use. We had all of the data that we gleaned from our workshops and from our subject matter experts. And we set to work to apply system dynamics. Now, I'm actually surprised at how many system dynamics talks there are at this conference. I thought I was going to be the only one talking about it. But now you're so bored of hearing that the problem with traditional thinking is that we think everything is linear and we think everything is instantaneous. And what we actually find is that real systems have feedback, that interventions take time to propagate through a system, that even when you introduce a change today, it doesn't mean that the change will be introduced tomorrow, and that it's never linear. And it's very difficult to quantify. Just because you sent 2 textbooks yesterday doesn't mean your matriculation scores will double tomorrow. It doesn't work that way. So by harnessing the power of reinforcing and feedback loop, reinforcing and balancing feedback loops, you can then find out where's the most powerful intervention so you can get the most bang for your buck. Maybe you only have to change 1 variable to change 5 instead of trying to change 5 to change 1. Right, so from that research then, this was the first paper that we were able to publish, and this was a proof of concept paper. Can we use system dynamics to model basic education systems? And what we were able to show with this paper and with the games that we played with the subject matter experts is what they wanted to do is they wanted to do a single intervention. So they wanted to intervene only once, and now it must be fixed. And we could show with the model that intervention has to be continuous. So Jess, that also answers your question with Khwezi's. We only fixed it once, but what will fix it is if we fix it continuously. Also, intervention needs to be early. You can't wait until the system reports a crisis. You have to expect the crisis and try and intervene before it happens. Because once a system has declined past a certain point, it's more difficult to restore it than just to maintain it. And then also you have to intervene in multiple areas. So our players in our game also just wanted to do one intervention. They just wanted to send all of the resources to the teachers, and we could show that it has to be multiple. So now that we have proof of concept, we could drill down into the different models. So I'm going to give you a flash of all of the work that we've been doing. So then we looked at the toddlers. We built a model for the toddlers, and our research question was, should we increase their enrollment into ECD programs, or should we just fix the quality of the programs for the Western Cape? In the Western Cape, we found that the need is more to increase the quality than the quantity. It doesn't help they go if they just sit there like picking in their noses all day. And but the best intervention is still if you can enable the parents to be more present. So alleviate poverty so the parents are more present. That's for the babies. So we got some results from the top down. As a validation exercise, we just wanted to see, can we get the same results from the bottom up? So we built the same model using an agent-based approach. And what we found actually is that we don't have enough data. It's a completely different paradigm. It is a way more statistical paradigm. And to statistically work with that data set and get those correlations between the variables, in the end, every time we tried to do the agent-based approach to see, does top-down speak to bottom-up, we bumped our heads, but we could find some results that kind of validated what we found with the system dynamics model. Then you just heard Khwezi's presentation, where Khwezi looked then, okay, now that we know, now that we have a model with which to look at the ECD system, what is the impact of COVID? So Khwezi then expanded that model for the COVID question. Then we also started building models for the primary school model. to model primary schools. This is an attempt to answer the research question. For the primary school, should we be fixing the home or should we be fixing the classroom? What is the biggest impact on children? Should it be the state fixing the classroom, or should it be more social interventions trying to get the parents to be more present, to enable the parents? So parents are absent for multiple reasons, poverty and broken homes and conflict. What we found through our modeling is that it's for the primary school learners. So we're looking 6-year-old to about 13-year-old. It's actually more effective to try and fix their home than to fix their classroom. But obviously a combination of interventions is the best. And again, if you can alleviate poverty, that helps the parents to be present. And if the parents are present, then it's better for the primary school kids. Again, we tried to just validate these results. We did it now bottom down. What's the system? What's the impact of the system on the kids? We want to do it now bottom up. What's the impact of the kids on the system? Again, we try to model the kids, but there just isn't enough data yet. So while we were busy modeling the children, we were also busy modeling the teachers. So what we asked for the Western Cape is, are our teachers of bad quality, or do we just not have enough teachers? If we should we increase how well they teach, or should we increase how many of them there are? For the Western Cape, we actually found that increasing how many there are is more effective than improving the quality of their curriculum. We need smaller classes before we need better teachers. That's what we found, but it's true for the Western Cape. We still need to do for the other provinces. Then while we were doing the primary school teachers, Siobhan was doing for modeling the high school. Now you remember the primary school model, we found that if you had to fix the home or the classroom, which one is more effective? Interestingly, for the teenagers, you have to fix the classroom. That's more effective because they're less dependent on their parents. They are actually looking for more resources at school, programming resources and digital resources. So it's the opposite for the high school model. You fix the classroom, not the home. With the primary school, you fix the home and not the classroom. What Teresa is busy with, Teresa is presenting on tomorrow. She'll tell you how she's now expanding the high school model to look at the impact of COVID on that. So you can listen to her tomorrow. And then while we were doing the basic education system, we were also looking at whether there will be enough teachers coming, because remember we found that we need more teachers. So then we started modeling the university stream to see, okay, but how are these kids coming through? So what Juliandre started doing is she asked the question of how do we get more graduates through, but also how do we get better graduates through? So she was trying to get the quality and the quantity at the same time. And she found that increasing the teacher salary is the most effective impact, because what she actually stumbled upon was that government put a large bursary at the start of your studies, but the bursary that you get as a first-year student is actually larger than the salary that you get as a starting teacher. So the incentive is all wrong, because it's more lucrative to stay in the system, so that only 22% of our teaching graduates actually, teaching students actually graduate, because it's more lucrative to just stay in the system forever. So Juliandre's policy recommendation is just move that money, make it lucrative to be a teacher, not a teaching student. Then Fatima also looked at a very, very controversial research question as to, we have this obsession that everybody must go to university, but what would the impact be if we had more pride in our trade education? And she did a very controversial intervention where she, instead of us holding on to every grade 9 to get to matric, what if we actually get those grade 9s out that can't perform? We free up resources for the remaining, and we actually help those other grade 9s to go into trade education. And she found some interventions that could alleviate our youth unemployment if we would just let go of this obsession that everybody needs a degree. So yeah, I don't know how we're going to publish that work, but I'm really trying to. Right, so now that we are at a point where we understand we start to need a hybrid approach. We have the system dynamics that can give us the systemic understanding, but actually modeling these learners, we need to start combining the agent-based model with the system dynamics model to more accurately move these learners. So what Siobhan is currently working on, he's presenting on this on Wednesday, is at the University of Stellenbosch, there's a question about how do we increase the number of graduates that graduate in minimum time, but also how do we increase the diversity of these graduates. So he's going to move them as agents going through the states of what year they're enrolled in, subject to how well the system is supporting them. And he's going to look at an intersectional study to understand how the system affects different intersectionalities. So he's presenting on that on Wednesday if you want to see. So while we're doing all of this education modeling, we are also doing experiments in quantification because that is very, very difficult, we've realized. So you'll remember I've now said twice that our agent-based modeling approach has failed, just because we don't have the data for it. So then Lucy grabbed took the primary school model. She said, okay, you know what I'll do? I'll try and generate data for you. So she used all kinds of simulation techniques and data wrangling and inference to fill in the gaps for the data that we didn't have in an attempt to generate data, while Casey then took the existing data sets and she made a summary of the existing data sets, and she also wrote a chapter on best practices for data collection. So when we compare the results of these two works, what we see is data collection is still superior to data generation. The results that we got, the validation was just way better on the collected data, even though it was expensive, than on the generated data, even though I think we used good statistical methods to generate that. So when in doubt, collect, don't generate. Then at the same time, we are busy with all kinds of fanciful research on how to quantify difficult things to quantify. So Ramon, last year, he did a game theoretical study on how to find love and romance using the Myers-Briggs system. He knew he was INTJ, and his research question was, how much must he compromise on himself to become compatible? When are you so compromised that compatibility isn't nice? And when is compatibility so difficult that just being yourself is the best? So we quantified love. And now this year, Esranel is presenting later today on a game theoretical study for the Sermon on the Mount. Can we quantify the tenets of a piece of Christian scripture? And can we set it up as a game theoretical approach? So all of this is fanciful, but it's helping us to get used to working with things that we can't weigh and measure. So just my way forward for the group. The group is looking, we are constantly trying to improve our models. We want to improve our accuracy with better calibration techniques. The techniques that we're using are good. The software that we're using is excellent. I wish Clemens Dempers was here. You guys can talk to Clemens about any logic. The calibration is nana. Then improve validation techniques and also increase confidence. I know with the hard OR people constantly, how do you know that this one is causing that one? So increase confidence in just how to defend those causal links. Also then greater systemic, so to bring the teachers with the primary school, with the high school, to build a massive model to not just get these local solutions, but also to get the more holistic, like Lisa said, the more holistic solution. And then there's lots that we still need to do. We need to do the babies, the prenatal realities, haven't measured that at all. Interprovincial realities like Khwezi started with, and then also the personal intersectionalities like Siobhan starting with. And then user access. At some point, this must start changing policy. So what we want to build is for the poorer communities, analog board games. Through gaming, people really get aha moments. And then also looking at like a digital management strategy game that we can roll out. I can calibrate the game for your school, and it'll be like a sim city or like a theme hospital that a principal can play and actually visually see the impact. So lots of way forward. If you want to collaborate, and especially if you want to fund, I welcome you.
Thanks, Lieschen. It was an inspiring talk. We have about 2 or 3 minutes. We have about 2 or 3 minutes if there are any thought. So don't make a long essay out of it.
One is not too familiar with system dynamics, the models that you do. What is a big model?
Lots of variables. and many assumptions on quantification. So I get scared. Size for me is how many assumptions, how many leaps of faith. So you can have 1,000 variables, but if you're sure of them, then it's not a big model for me. I count list of assumptions.
Number of assumptions.
Again, it's the number, but it's also the nature of them. You can reasonably assume that a poor parent is not present, but it gets more difficult to reasonably assume. So if I can use fuzzy logic, it's not, yes, it's the number of assumptions, but then it's also the reasonability, that intuition thing. I don't know yet how to express the intuition thing. Sometimes you just know something isn't like a.
On slide 4, I saw the.
Dit is lekker, Kyle. Ek wag vir jou eksaminering. You in November, son.
I was just wondering how the academic ability goes down from grade 5 to grade 6.
Grade 5. It's different data sets too. So it's not the same sample. That's from the National School Effectiveness Study, and then that's from the SACMIC. So it's just estimates. But the distance between quintiles stay reasonably the same.
One last short one. No, sorry, is there somebody with a hand up? Oh, sorry, Lee.
Thanks, Theo, and thank you, Lieschen, for the presentation. I have one short question. Have you tried expert elicitation to enrich the data?
Yes, yeah. I think we're still very unsure. We have a collaboration with a lady at the Western Cape Education Department, and I've asked her to look at it. And but the buy-in is still they want to model everything, so they don't understand that the model is limited. So I think Jace also asked, like, what other variables we can put stuff in here. So I'm still at the buy-in phase, that I can reasonably describe the entire basic education system in 9 variables. And there is some value to that model. So yeah, but I'm very slowly showing them the models because I don't want to blow a fuse and then they're just, then they're done with you. And so you have to slowly ease them into it.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I think we'll have to give time for those who want to move sessions. So we'll call it at an end now, but I'm sure if you want to comment all sessions, I think she'll be around.
Speed run through, like, try to. What we can.
Okay, thanks. And you?
See why I want to work with you. Like, you can help us.
I need to go.
Is there a way we can turn the headphone down? It's not on.
Negative 5 then. Right. Right, so that's on to all your notes. Oh, welcome to the third person in this session on systems behavior and behavioral studies, which I think is an important facet of OR. So we welcome Josephine Musango, who is actually a member of the GSP, I gathered. But she's right at home. Speak on the applied system thinking in OR. Again, you to introduce the topic further.
Thank you so much, and good afternoon, everyone. I'm Josephine Musango, and I'm really excited to be here at the Operation Research Society of South Africa because it's my first time to be here. And I do thank Lieschen. She invited the South Africa System Dynamics chapter to contribute to this conference. So thank you for that. And we are actually, the work is based on our recently published book, Applied Systems Dynamics in South Africa, authored by Nalini from ESCOM, Andries Buta from Dynamic Systems, and myself, at the time of writing, I was at Stellenbosch University. So we brought a wealth of over 15 years of working independently on system dynamics to culminate it into one book to help students on how to do system dynamics in a proper way. And bring the different perspective from academic teaching, from consultant way of teaching, and then from teaching classroom for 10 years, where I started from scratch, build a model for 10 years, as well as running it as a project with non-academic researchers, from government to consultants and different spaces with even community members using community-based system dynamics. So this book was more like how to do system dynamics. And today, the presentation is based on the chapter 2, which is on systems thinking. And the focus is how might systems thinking be useful in operations research, problem solving, and decision making. So I'll introduce the two fields. I know I'm not from operations research, you know much more than I. And then I'll share about systems thinking in the iceberg model and its relevance in operations research. Then systems thinking techniques, two of them from the book, and how to do them, demonstrate them. And then also when to use systems thinking approach. And finally, just a short conclusion. So what is systems thinking? I think that's the first question in what is operations research? Of course, systems thinking is a study that looks at how things are connected, how different elements are connected and interact with one another, and they function within a system in order to function for a particular purpose, but as a whole. But the operations research, on the other hand, is an analytical approach where you break things into parts and then you study them to be able to understand them, and you use very well-defined mathematical analysis to understand those parts. So in our case, we assert that in order for you to solve any problem, you need to understand the root cause of the problem. And systems thinking provides you a philosophical foundations to be able to go into the root cause of a problem. So now let's look at how we solve problems. When you are first faced with a problem, any manager or even personal problems, any problem, we always have a perceived cause of that problem. And what we immediately do, if you just focus on the perceived, you immediately take a temporary solution and you assume that the problem is gone. And that is a misconception. But we find that the problems we are faced with, they persist, they come back, even with a much bigger magnitude than they started. So that's why we need to come up with the understanding of the root cause of a problem and get the corrective solutions. What 1 minus n means, it means that there are many causes to a problem, and there are also many solutions to that particular problem. So there's no single solution and there's no single cause. So there are many causes which interact with one another. So now let's look at how we understand problem and iceberg model. So we all have mental models, our beliefs about how things work. And it's our beliefs about how things work that makes us structure the system the way it is, which drives the pattern of behavior that we see, which drives the events that we see. Generally, everyday practices, we always hear about events. And the leading questions about events is, what happened? Where? Who was involved? But those are different elements, fragmented. Now, that doesn't tell us much about anything. Then when you look at the patterns of the problem, or the behavior patterns or behavior of the problem, we begin understanding how that thing developed over time. So like yesterday we had load shedding. That was an event. So if you're looking at a pattern of behavior, when did it start? How has it been happening? So that you're looking at it over time. But again, it doesn't tell you how things are interconnected and affect each other in a cause and effect relationship. So getting deeper into the structure of the model, you are understanding how things, the different elements are connected with one another and how they affect each other in a cause and effect relationship. So by understanding the structure, how the structure is connected, or how the different elements are connected within the structure, then you understand why that pattern is being observed and why we are having the events that we are faced with. So at the moment, we still argue that load shedding is a problem, but that's not a problem. It's a symptom of a problem. Okay, so I will demonstrate 2 systems thinking techniques. There are different techniques that you can use. So we have brainstorming techniques, we have dynamic and temporal techniques, we also have structure techniques to capture the structure. But for you to start any of the work, you need to have the brainstorming technique to be able to come up with an understanding of the problem. So the first one is the 5 why approach, asking why 5 times. But this 5 why approach, you already have asked the questions of the what, the why, the when, and the who. And the process is you establish the team that is going to carry out the procedure or the problem. And then the team needs to be people that understand the situation. But then when you define the problem needs to be in a way that anyone else who is not part of the team understands it. And then you obtain empirical data and you conduct an analysis. Then you can determine the root cause of the problem from that process. And then you understand the countermeasures. Then you establish the improvement plan, and finally you can evaluate the progress. So this process, it's usually not for very complex problems. It's more from simple to moderate level problems. I rarely use it in my own work because the kind of work that I do, they don't have data. So I actually use the 5 why in the goal tree analysis, where you have vague statements, but then you move to get to understand clarity of indicators of a particular issue. Then in this case, there are different options, but in this case, I will share one in this presentation. We have another option on how to do that. So you ask 5 why 5 times, but the why is for the reason. And this is just a simple demonstration what could happen if you're driving to work and then the car stops in the middle of the road. So you need to find a solution for that. And the first question you ask, why did the car stop? And then you have the reason, because it ran out of fuel. And then you have the evidence, the car is in the middle of the road. And then you get a solution. One of the solution could be discussed is maybe you wait for help. Go to the next question. So until you end up to find a solution that would be generally recommended. So in this case, see at the end of the 5/5 why, it's even gone out of the real issue where it's about improving the blocking skills. So in this case, the recommended solution is to keep a credit card. But this was a real situation, which was it was a 5Y approach that carried out, but we put that the example here. Okay, then there's a template that you can use for the 5Y approach to use when you're analyzing the problems. But of course, we need to be aware of some of the problems of the different methods that you use. And one of the weaknesses of the 5Y is a symptom of a problem may end up being identified as the root cause. So you need somebody who is experienced in the using of the technique to be able to identify, to help in the facilitation process. Then different answers may also arise from the analysis process, depending on the team. And one of the ways to counter that weakness is to provide data and evidence. But the challenge is when you don't have data, especially if you're working with wicked problems. You don't have data, and you have to start with what you have. And that's where I said I rarely use 5Y in this context. Goal tree analysis may help. But still, goal tree analysis, you ask the why question. It asks the why and the what. Why do you want to do this? What does this mean? So in that process, it gets you to having a clear goal about the problem. Then the second technique we are sharing is the 6-heart perspective. So this is more about the perspective about the problem and not a reflection about the person who is providing that perspective. And in this case, there are 6 hearts. There's the white, the red, the yellow, the green, the black, and the blue. All of them are having a particular way of what each person is going to contribute. But the blue heart is mainly the person who facilitates the process. So that person needs to be really someone who can be able to help people in thinking about the thinking process and help facilitate the discussions about a particular problem. The white is more about the facts, the data. The red is emotions, emotive aspects. The black is about the risks. The yellow is the advantages or the benefits. And then the green is being creative, new ideas, and so forth. So in a group, you get a team of 6 people, of which the blue one is already identified. You ask people to pick up a particular card or the hat, but then generally people pick hats based on what they think they will do best. So when they pick the card, the blue member swaps the cards. So the red gets the white, the yellow gets a green, the black gets a yellow, the green gets a black, and then the white gets the red. And this also to help people to have a different perspective and also learn those skills in the area that they might feel that they're not good at. And then from that process, the blue hat helps in the discussing about the issues, and then they summarize the conclusions or the recommendations about the problem. So we demonstrate one of these problems. Again, this is the real world, which also we share in the book. In this case, there was an institute that was hosting tours, and they were having a lot of food that is left every Friday, but this was before COVID. And then they had to come up with a solution. What do we do with this food that is left all the time we have meetings? So they formed a team. So the white person collected the facts. These tours are happening every 2 weeks. About 50 people are invited, but 30% of the people are not attending, and that was based on the attendance register. Then the new idea is about, let's give people in the building food. Let's invite the people in the building. And then some of the emotive aspects is like, oh, the staff will be happy, even motivating them to be part of this process and being given free money, free food. Then risks and gaps is about what if we bring about chaos in the process of inviting people? What if people get allergic to some of the foods they eat and then they blame the company? So those are some of the risks, and then the advantages is about we are not wasting food, and we can perhaps provide the food to different departments in cycles. And they ended up agreeing that, yes, let's invite the people in the building to come for food, but then let's do it in cycles in order to prevent chaos in the building, or time they have the food available for them. So that's how some of these techniques can be applied. And this is very useful, particularly if you are you need to think whether you are starting a new product or it's a problem that you've incurred you want to solve. So you need to think about what it is about, but mainly it's for brainstorming about the problem. So when do we use systems thinking? When we are dealing with complex problem with lots of variables and cause and effect relationships. But of course, we model problems within a system, not a system. If we try to model a system, then we are not going to be able to finish modeling and finding more problems. Then when we have a recurring problem, that's also when we use systems thinking. Solutions are also not evident. And when also apparent complexity is higher than inherent complexity. So you see the problem seems so complicated, but you can actually capture that system, that problem in a system structure. You actually mentioned about the problem of South African education. There's a structural system, there's a structural problem because you have how the system is structured is producing the behavior that we see. So we do assert that we really need to understand this root cause of a problem in order to be able to solve problems. Otherwise, if we don't understand the problems, we end up having unintended consequences that are very devastating. So systems elements are very crucial to understand them, and they help in improving decision-making in a constantly changing world in order for us to continuously adapt. And you won't end up having issues like trampoline for sale only being used once. Used only that solution once. Then, if you want the book, you can contact Nalini Pillay. It's available. I think it goes for 1,900 per copy. And then this year we are hosting our 10th annual System Dynamics Conference. So we do invite you to register. This year is we are invited people to register for free as part of our contribution to the community of System Dynamics and advancing the field to in South Africa and beyond. So thank you so much. And we are donating this to one student. So in the student, I think there's awards for students. Yeah. So this could be part of the award.
Fantastic, thank you. That's so generous, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you too for interest of the other topic. If I can budge in with a little question first. The SST work helps understanding the problem, what influences what. How do we link that on to the solution process? How do you link potential solutions onto what the model is saying? Have you looked at that range of? Have you looked at that range of issues?
That's a very, very good question, because that's a question that people ask when they encounter with system dynamics. Because generally, as human beings, we are always thinking about solutions. But we are thinking about solutions for problems that we don't understand. So system dynamics gives you a process of understanding the problem in order to be able to identify what are a high leverage point for you to intervene and for you to observe the desired results. So in system dynamics, there's a system dynamics modeling process. So what I've just shared is just the tip of an iceberg. So the process starts with the problem conceptualization to hypothesis definition of what is the causes of the problem, to now simulation modeling, to then doing the policy analysis, and then the implementation. And then and that process is not linear. It's an iterative process. So you go back and forth to improve the problem. So in the end, you will find what would be the high leverage solution to intervene. And just to give you maybe an example of projects that have been involved. One of them was the lead modeler in the South African Green Modeling Report, where we were looking at what would be the investment interventions that South Africa needs to do to deal with the issue of green economy. Like green economy, in this case, we are defining it. How do we move to low carbon economy that is resource efficient and it also looks into poor employment? So we're looking at GDP, natural resources, and employment. So we actually made one of the controversial results, which we indicated that the NDP targets were not being able to be achieved relating to renewable energy in South Africa. More aggressive measures were required at that moment. But what system dynamics doesn't tell you, it doesn't tell you who is going to do what. It does provide the different possible options that you need to do. So it's not prescriptive. It doesn't prescribe.
You need to involve the management in the whole modeling process in order to achieve that. And sometimes they're resistant.
So that was not just an academic exercise. It's an exercise where it's a work commission from the government. Actually, we worked with the different departments in the national department, local municipalities, the industry. So it's not something that we took it on ourselves. Another example is, I don't know whether you know mohair. Anyone knows mohair? Okay, South Africa is the world's largest producer of mohair in the world. I didn't know, but I knew it when I did this research. Okay, so the DTI wanted to understand the competitiveness of South Africa in the mohair industry. And when they came to us as researchers, we started asking them the questions. What's the problem? They want to improve competitiveness. And they brought to us a particular booklet. And we started reading that booklet about all the issues that are being raised. But then we could see there's actually a particular problem, a systemic problem here, where we could see that there's a particular circles that are happening within the mohair industry. But then we asked the client, where do you want competitiveness in the mohair? Do you know what is happening in the farming? So, the commodity cycle aspect was really apparent in the work. So in the end, what happened? They ended up asking us to understand the mohair production part to be able to look on the value chain. And that, what it ended up doing, it ended up bringing the different stakeholders from farmers, from mohair agents, to millers, to the manufacturers, to the consumers in one space to discuss that. Did a great thing than just doing a model outside or doing a model elsewhere. And in the end, they actually developed a strategy on how to start working on improving the competitiveness by just focusing on the farmers, which was not in their initial thinking.
Thank you. This is a very comprehensive answer.
That example is also in the book. So by the book. Cases that we produced, not cases that are picked from the book or from somewhere else. So it has case studies that we worked, each of us individually, and they've made impact in the work.
Any other questions? Back there.
Mathematicians, we normally say for any problem, there's a solution, but it doesn't mean that the solution is correct. So I want to know, if you have a problem, how can you use this systems and analysis to come up with the best solution among a number of solutions?
That's a very, very good question, because you're looking at multi-solving problem solution. So firstly, you need to understand that not all problems can be solved using system dynamics. That's number one. So if, for example, I hurt myself, or for example, I had an accident. When I go to the emergency room, the doctor would ask, why did you have the accident? So that's not a system dynamics question. The surgeon will be asking, how can I treat this person as quickly as possible that they can save their life? So you won't try to use system dynamics there. But then I've gone through the process of healing, but I'm not healing. So why she's got the best care? We've given her this. Why is it that it's not going? Why is this problem persisting? Then now you need to ask the why question. So system dynamics asks the why question, not the how and the what. So you need to understand that problem. And the problem needs to be within a system. If you try to model a system, you never model anything. Model a problem within a system. And this book helps you in identifying the
Which sessions the next speaker can
Sorry?
Morning and in afternoon. Just keep on trying.
Bro, when you, oh, you know. Oh.
Has Isabel run away?
Hope not.
Which you took my module now, right?
We were just worried you'd run away.
Yeah, I thought I'll leave the end of stronger.
Just gone and taken all three.
I just burned out.
We've had one less module this semester.
Yeah. Second year is just easier, right?
Just get the link.
Speak. Who's going to speak?
Okay.
Well, we come the last of our fourth presentations in this session. Our speaker gives a whole new meaning to the word interdisciplinary, or having qualifications. I'll probably get this wrong. OR, animal science, IT, and she's a qualified vet at the same time.
Yes. No way.
So whether the social development projects or animals societies or human societies, I wouldn't know from the part over to you, Isabel.
Thank you. Yeah, and I think whenever people say something about my qualifications, it just to me is a little bit of a sign of a misspent youth. So hopefully we can make something sensible out of it. So this presentation is Leanne's and my presentation, so it's not my work. And Leanne will chip in when I mess up. So what we're talking about is complexity in social development projects. It is all going to be about animals, as Theo pointed out. So today is going to be about dogs and donkeys and a few cats in between. And I wish at this point that we had the clarity of the program that Lieschen is running to say, this is what we're solving, this is the bigger system, this is what we're trying to achieve. We're not there yet. We're really muddling before that. We're trying to understand what is this complexity and how do we go about dealing with it and what do we do. What I'm going to talk about is two projects. We started this portfolio of, I would say, community animal health and welfare projects in 2019. And we've been messing around with some student projects, and some of our students are here today working with us. And I say messing around because we're trying to understand the mess. We're trying to understand what is it about and where can we make an impact and how can we leverage things. So the two projects that I'm talking about, the one is a current project. It's around donkey health in Limpopo province. And the other one is a cats and dogs project here in View. So what we're trying to do at this point, not understanding the problem completely yet, is really saying what lenses can we put on this system and what do we learn about those lenses. So I think we boldly said in our abstract when we wrote it, that I think there were very nice words in there, like weaving things into methods and tools and whatever. We're not there yet, definitely not. So I want to be upfront about that. So what we're going to be, and we're also comfortable about not being there. The problems are complex and we need to understand them properly first before we start thinking about tools. So we're going to talk about transdisciplinarity very briefly, and luckily I'm outclassed in terms of competence about that by Lisa's talk this morning. We're going to talk a little bit about innovation and a little bit about sustained benefit, and saying if we put these lenses on these projects, what have we been learning? And is it useful? And what do we do next with that information? So that's what we're talking about. So first of all, community projects around donkeys and that's a big word to pronounce, Bahananua. It's a very small village in northern Limpopo. Those of you who think the world ends at the X-River Mountains, there's something happening behind that. Unfortunately, the location of the village that we're working with is on the western edge of the Saipasberg Mountains, right up north before you get to Zimbabwe. And the reason why I'm highlighting this, there's relevance in the fact that it's at least a 4-hour drive from Pretoria. So that complicates a little bit what we're doing and what we're trying to achieve, but a really interesting village to be working with, really rural South Africa. In other words, community structures and tribal structures in place that we have to deal with if we want to develop it and move forward on that. What are we trying to achieve in this particular project? It's work that's funded by the Donkey Sanctuary in the UK, and it's really as broad as saying we want to have improved donkey health and welfare. And I've got the One Health word up there, and I can talk about that a little bit more, but it's really saying donkeys in the context of the communities that they are living and working in. So it's not only animal health, it's also environmental health, it's also human health. And then, so what are we doing? There are 3 key things here, and I think the one, we're not fixing a system because the system isn't there. There's a lack of access to services. So we really need to understand and say, how can we provide household access to animal health services? That's the first thing that we're on about. Resources for animal care, and there I'm talking about, let's first go to the household access to services. It's around minor injuries, animals that are not being attended to because of harnessing injuries and things like that. But then also major things, you know, in a sense, emergencies and not having access to services in that context. And in the process, at least we got the project team to understand how to really get your hands dirty. And taking a donkey's temperature there. So that's sort of on the access of care problem that we work with. And then the next thing, when we talk about resources, we've got a stream there that says, how can we assist communities to innovate? And that's a loaded word. But how do we provide access to water, better harnessing, better tack, better winter food? What you see at the bottom there, those are the watermelons that are used in winter when the grass is not growing properly to add nutrition to all of this. So we designed this project to have the 3 streams. The one is saying initially engagement and exploration, a baseline survey of understanding what's happening in the community. And then we've got the access to care stream, and there we've been training donkey care workers. We've got 19 workers trained at the moment, and on a daily basis, they send us reports on what they're seeing in the community, what they're doing and what they're treating, and they're developing their confidence in providing a very basic care service there, and all of that is funded by the project at the moment, which obviously raises a sustainability issue. And then on the innovation side, around these aspects that we've got here, we want to start engaging people in solving these problems on their own. I think initially we wanted to talk about co-creation, but it's within we added the innovation word, and I think that complicates stuff also a little bit, and I'll get to that. And then we've got an ongoing assessment and reflection process by which we gathering information and seeing how we're doing on this. So this is what that project is about. The next project is an NRF-funded project now TIERS is stands for the Emma Animal Rescue Centre. It's an organization in Ocean View in Cape Town, and they have been existing for, I think must be 22, 25 years now, providing services in this area. This hopefully you'll feel more comfortable with. This side of the mountain. So it's Ocean View, Masipumalele, and then Vrygrond is the other, and Overcome Heights. Those are the informal settlements that we are talking about. And what we wanted to achieve with this project is it's particularly a COVID lockdown related project that we did to understand how people are coping with domestic animal care in that situation, exploring the relationship between the NGOs and the communities that they serve. And I think that's a very important thing. You've got NGOs that are in levels of sophistication. Some of them are really good and some of them are really struggling. And in understanding TIERS, in my mind, and I think in the landscape of animal welfare NGOs, it's right up there with people who are really getting it right and understanding how they're doing that. And then we boldly have up the explore transdisciplinary approach to data gathering. I cannot remember how that came into the project, whether it was a funded requirement or whether we put that forward, but that was a conscious thing that we had to deal with in this project. And how did we go about it? We first consulted and tried to understand the transdisciplinary thing. So we found out all the transdisciplinary researchers we could find in the country who would talk to us and sort of see what are they doing, what would they suggest around this. We ended up using a data gathering tool called SenseMaker to go around this process. And then we trained data collectors, some information, and develop perspectives on what's happening in the community through that data gathering process, and then ultimately communicating the findings. So that's sort of what that project briefly is about. Before I go on to the lenses and what that told us of each project, I just want to reflect a little bit on complexity and buzzwords and development in general. If we think about this, there's a lot of reasons why people get involved in development, and I'm not going to say a lot around this aspect, except for that drives a certain behavior in a project team. And I think that's really complicated, and it makes for positive and negative dynamics, and that's something you need to understand and think about as you design these projects. In practice, project teams are confronted with a lot of things that they need to actually deal with when they've got a funder and they want to deliver a project. You're talking about return on investment, you're talking about outcomes, monitoring and evaluation, you're talking about impact, all sorts of words. And the project team often is not ready to be dealing with those things. So that's just another perspective that I think you should keep in mind when working with development projects specifically. So this slide is just summarizing a wicked problem, and you would have by now all seen and heard and whatever too many wicked problems today around. But I think there's a number of parameters here that says, I think the important ones or the interesting ones, once you've got a solution, you've got new problems. These problems aren't easy to solve. So, and we've heard it often today, a mathematical model is not going to do it. I think we just simply need to accept that and not even debate it. But really just being sensitive to the fact that there's a lot of aspects around this. I'm going to try and speed up a bit, but just to say, we then selected 3 lenses when we talk about this. And I think innovation is the one, transdisciplinarity, the other one, sustained benefit. I'm going to use sustained benefit instead of sustainability so as not to confuse it with environmental sustainability and things like that. We're really talking about how do we make this project last. That's what we, all the benefits from the project last. And then I throw in the word resilience there to say, in our South African communities, they're living on the edge so much, as Lieschen has explained, in terms of the income levels. When there are shocks to the system, it really can topple everything into a real mess, not our interpretation of messy problems. So the things that we're selecting here is really to say, how do we build resilience when we do these projects? So for each of these things, what do they mean? I think when we say innovation, it's about being smart. And why is this South African important thing? We don't have resources, we have to be smart. We don't have choice. We're not going to be forward unless we're smart with what we have. Transdisciplinarity, these are not singular solutions. We can't solve it by building another bridge. We can't solve it by having another IT system. We do need different lenses around the table when we solve this. And sustained benefit, as I said, we have to make the impact last. Again, we don't have resources. We waste. This is not American aircraft manufacturing. We can do and try again and do it again. And maybe then, have another budget to do it another time. We really have to use what we've got and make that last. Just on the interfaces between these things, they can't only be smart, they also need to last. We need to be satisfying all of this at the same time. We need multiple perspectives on value creation. So multiple perspectives on that side to assist us in creating value that's going to go the full way. And then we need to co-create. If we come, we've seen this in many development projects, if we come from perspective of we've got the answer, we're going to tell you how to live, given our answer is not going to work. We really do know that right now. And then just finally, taking these particular perspectives, because this is a South African, it fits with our context. It fits with our context of not having enough, of being on the edge, of not really, when systems fail, things become very interesting. They're very precarious. And this is why these are the lenses that we are selecting for these particular projects. So now I need to really start moving on a little bit. And to say, I'm not going to go through the definition of transdisciplinarity. You've heard more than enough from people who know much more than me about this. But I think what I want to pick up on include different parts of society, just to reinforce the point we can't do it on our own. So what did we learn in the Donkey Project around transdisciplinarity? I think we have people around the table from veterinary science, with systems thinking experience, with statistical sciences experience. We're involved in ethnography in our community engagement work. So we've got a lot of people there who know a lot, and that creates very particular problems. If you are really knowledgeable, getting that information flows together to have people focus on the project and get something done. So the few pointers that we have up there: team participation, who does what and when, who decides, who's going to make the call when things are difficult. How often do you engage when it's a team of really, really busy people? How do you get into the calendars and make it work? Make the time for the project that it really needs and deserves to be successful. Collaborative decision making. We can't have a hierarchical project structure in a project that needs innovation. That's my bottom line conclusion from this whole exercise, is to say we really need to think about decision-making structures in these kinds of projects. Information flow, participatory, of course. You cannot generate information from one side and think you're going to have a transdisciplinary project. And then really sitting and making sure, and we often make this assumption when the project starts, that everybody shares the vision and actually knows why did we write this proposal, what are we saying, what do we want to achieve. So those are just a few things. On our TS project, we were really doing a post-pandemic kind of assessment. I think there we had the community explicitly included as researchers in our project, and that generated good and interesting information for us. I think in going with a software solution around transdisciplinarity, and Lisa, I would really like to afterwards get your opinion on this. I think, thank you, we really applicated a lot of transdisciplinary dynamics, and that perhaps was not the smartest thing to do. In terms of being smart, I think you can innovate in a number of ways, and I'm not going to go into these definitions. Prof. Sarah Grobbelaar on Wednesday is going to do a plenary around innovation, and she's got the theory around that. I don't. But just noting that you can innovate around a number of things, and you need to be conscious about how you're going to do that. We did a very explicit process in the Donkey Project. Select an innovation group, facilitate the discussion about innovation, identify solutions, rank them, the whole lot. We facilitated doing all of this. And when it came to the decision making, the MCDA part of this, that's when we realized we don't understand the community's decision-making models. And I think we're right there at the moment, and we need to be unpacking that and looking at that a little bit differently. I'm not going to go into all the other challenges there. On the TS project, I think the innovation wasn't a key part of what we were trying to do, but I think useful things that came out, there was in the software system a storytelling tool that allowed the community to say things, and there were tags, it was just being themed, that information that came out, and I think that was quite useful in getting multiple perspectives on what the community is doing. Sustained benefit, this one, we consciously looked at the Donkey Project in making things lost. So we looked at this in a more structured fashion. We always think making things lost is about finances. Yes, of course it is, but it's also about a number of other dimensions. And we, in this particular case, we looked at these things explicitly and say, how do they feed into this project? And I'm just going to pick out a few of them. I think working in a rural community where there's a traditional structure, that means some of your project choices are being made for you. So if you want to include people in a project team, you have to go through the tribal structures, especially if there's funding attached to it and people are going to be earning out of this project, then you don't have a choice as to what your team looks like. I think that's a dynamic to keep in mind. Also, the effect of that selection then on your project structure, which is our financial notes that I made here. A lot of other things here. What we saw as a fundamental lever towards sustainability here is to say, let's start hooking up with structures that exist. So we've got the community service veterinarians involved, and that process seemed to be working at the moment, where they are providing a service that's that would not have been there normally, and we are engaging them actively and keeping them involved in the project that we are running with. On the side of the TS project, Sustained benefit wasn't the key focus here, but there are a number of aspects I think that that came out, and maybe I can just pick on the social aspect of the influence of the data gatherer on your project results in the end. When people own your gateway to the community, the data that's gathered people can tell you what they think you want to hear, and you need to be conscious of the effect of that, of the sustainability of everything you come up with. I really wanted to get to this slide is just to say, initially we thought we have now learned a lot and we can start weaving those wonderful tools, but really we should sit back a little bit and say, what are the things, where are we at and what don't we do? And I think when we map it out like this, there's a lot of process issues in each of these lenses that we still need to address. And these are just some initial thoughts and we can build on them. But to say, if we look at it from a sustained benefit kind of lens, you consciously and actively need to design for sustained benefit. Otherwise, you're not going to get there. You are going to be doing things haphazardly, and that feel-good thing we're doing this project, and all the poor little dogs and cats are going to have beds and water and all the rest of it. Unless you design to make it last, it's not going to last. It's as simple as that. Picking just on some other points. Project organization, explicit inclusion of the community. There are process and program structure issues that you need to address. So we just try to map them out. And then on the innovation side, really saying appropriate innovation is essential when the state is failing. When the systems are failing, how do you innovate and what do you need to focus on to make this work? So these are just a few things to think about, but I think that mapping them like this is also saying, where's the maturity of our practice? Really saying at the process level, we still need to really uncover a lot and we need to figure out a lot before we get to make everything work at the structure level and at the method level. And we need to link that back, thanks to you. I'm not going to go too much into your lunch. We need to link this back then to theory and see how can we really start proper understanding here. So I want to, this is sort of my last point, my second last slide, my last point. ICOF in 1979 said the future of operational research is past, making the point explicitly that too many models and algorithms is really not going to last when things are turbulent. And I think we've heard this message today a few times now. When problems are complex and we are in desperate need of them, we really cannot only think numbers. It's nice, it's almost sort of you want to be deduced by the fact that you can build the model because you know how. You can either simulate the data or gather the data, because both of those things you can do, but it's not in the long run necessarily good to you at a better time. I think, as with all the other speakers in this session, probably making the pool more holistic approaches and making things last. Where are we next? We want to start exploring how do we integrate these lenses towards impact. What do we think and say and do around tools, program design? And then I think there's a lot of interesting things to be done about community-driven data collection. We don't have Liesjen's funding. We have landed our next project, which is Steinshop, which will be looking at specifically co-creating with communities for One Health approaches. So that will be, we will be building on the tiers work for that one. And thank you very much. Those are all I wrote.
We have still a few who wants to raise some discussion. Again, brief ones, not long essays.
Thanks, great talk. You mentioned that the funding that you receive can put constraints, perhaps, on how you project. Do you ever do a sort of like control where you say, well, if the funding had no constraints and didn't incentivize certain ways of thinking about grants, how would you like to have done? Is that something that is worth doing?
Absolutely. I think in my head, I always play the lotto to see if that'll get me out of this financial problem. But I absolutely think so. I think that should be done. We haven't done that. The one thing that we did pick up on, which I think is linked to what you were saying, is we've got a project budget. There's a hell of a lot of uncertainty in this environment that we're working with. Should we start thinking of at the design phase, how do we deal with that uncertainty and how do we design, given that we're going to uncover uncertainty? That's, the only thing that I think we've made explicit based on what we've done. But I think what you are saying, that building that ideal world, yeah, I think the next thing that I would want to do after I have the ideal picture is then to say, okay, now I know I don't have that funding. How can I modularize the program so that when I have bits of funding, I can have independent things that I put down that can actually independently make an impact. And when I get the next funding, I can go back. But yeah, I think, again, it's a constrained environment, so we have to start to be smarter than I think what we know to be.
Have you considered maybe like initially going into a sector which has more funding, for example, horses? I know that's very popular especially in the Western Cape. There's a lot of funding behind that, so I'm sure maybe some farmers or something would be more interested in funding.
Well, I think one of the things that people are trying to do, and that's where the One Health picture come in, is to combine animal health and welfare with human health and welfare, because there's more funding, definitely. Animal welfare and animal health is the orphan child of everything. So that level of combination, definitely, people are looking at, and I think that has got potential. Looking at industry specific, various industries, the horse racing industry is doing things, but they're not necessarily in their research efforts focused on this level of welfare. I think a lot of agricultural sectoral bodies do look at emerging farmer integration, so there's some potential. But those are good ideas because we have to, reach the boundaries a little bit.
Oh, I was going to say one last one. I see.
I was going to quickly add a comment there.
Sorry?
I was going to quickly add a comment.
It's okay, then I'll come back to you.
Picking up on the point you made, I think that's another way of looking at it is to try and link this particular animal welfare problem to a problem that perhaps people do want to throw money at, or do have money for, like noticing that donkeys wander into streets. So it's actually a transport problem. So we could hook into the funding for on the transport road safety side.
So my question is kind of relating to, especially, I guess, for complex systems that often involve resource flows. Source controls can be quite an effective way to mitigate the problem. And so I wanted to ask what tools we have to try and shift the perspective of lower income households where animal welfare isn't as much of a priority, and get community members more directly involved in problem solutions.
That's a very smart question, Leanne. Do you want to respond to that?
So your question was what tools are available?
Yeah, to get sort of the source to be more involved with the solution.
That was part of our story gathering exercise in the Tears community, to get people just to tell the stories of how they coped with their animals under lockdown when they were actually struggling to feed their own families. The stories that came out were extraordinary. That people do make a plan, but also of the value of the NGOs that are supporting those. So no, we don't really have tools, but we got some amazing information.
You eat the donkeys, of course.
Sorry.
Eat the donkeys.
Yeah, we'll talk about that often.
Our next project actually in that area is to work with communities on co-creation of solutions. I think that also focusing on the zoonosis or the health problems which affect animals and humans. Yeah. And to solve those problems.
Well, our time is up, so I'd just like to say thanks to all four speakers who made for an excellent session.